I'm Pastor Steve, and I want to thank you for downloading the essay, Jesus, an Alternative History. And I want to talk to you for a few minutes about why I wrote this essay and what some of the objections are likely to be. What I have in this essay is a complete restatement of the narrative history of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. And it is a narrative that is going to raise some objections on the part of a lot of traditional Christian believers. And my response to that is I didn't write the essay for traditional Christian believers. I wrote the essay for everybody else, and there's a lot of everybody else out there. That our culture has been so shaped and so impacted by the traditional Christian narrative. In recent times, we have other documents that we can look at that really shed a lot of light on what was going on in the first century to help us take a little more of a critical, analytical approach to the traditional narrative. Now, I got into this whole thing back in 1998. I was reading brushing up on my Hebrew. I'm a minister, and I'm a minister in a church that at the time I was ordained required us to have some ability in reading the ancient languages. I was fortunate to learn Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and to learn them from some very good teachers and to just stay with reading the language. So I was translating the book of Psalms back in 98. And when I was started out on Psalm number 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his meditation, his thought, his focus, his energy is focused on the law of the Lord, on the Torah. He is like a tree planted by streams of water. One of my weaknesses has been that when I encounter ancient texts, they speak to my heart and my mind. And I saw that idea that the Torah of God is like a stream of living water. Then I turned over in the New Testament to the letter to the Galatians, St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, the church, the Christian church, Paul's church in Galatia. I looked at that, and in that document, he says the law is a curse. And he advocates freedom from the law, that we don't need to have anything to do with this law, that what we need is faith in the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the belief that Jesus Christ is Lord, and that belief will liberate us for eternal life. Two very different ways of looking at things. That brought me to a careful and close analysis of the work of Robert Eisenman in his books, James, the Brother of Jesus, and the New Testament Code. Books which I have read in great detail. When I first read them, I couldn't accept this stuff at all. So I went through the sources. I retraced the work that Eisenman had done. I did it meticulously. I did it in the original languages, studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, studying the Nag Hammadi material, the Nag Hammadi Gnostic Gospels, the Pseudo-Clementine literature, Eusebius, Hegesippus, Josephus, Philo, just all these old books, and reading them and seeing that Eisenman really makes a pretty good point. It's incontrovertible in my opinion. What he lifts up is that there was a tremendous conflict in Judea, Palestine in the first century of the Common Era. that in that first century that there was a conflict between the Jewish people who wanted to hold to the traditions of their fathers, wanted to follow the purity teachings and the separation teachings of the Torah, wanted to stay with the traditions of their roots. And they were intersecting a completely different culture, a culture that would eventually totally overrun them, the culture of Rome. And that there was a conflict that developed there. The characters who are described in the New Testament historically were right in the middle of that conflict. And it was the school of St. Paul and St. John, the way of thinking that formulated doctrinal Christianity that was very pro-Roman, very much aimed at Europe and the Europeans, at the Gentiles. That religion won the conflict. And it won it with the help of the Roman army, which basically just destroyed the people in Judea. And all of this is available to us with a historic, critical reading of the New Testament, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Gospels, and all the other material that we have now historically that sheds light and shows us what happened in the ancient times. Now, in Christian doctrine, right there, the conflict between what was called the circumcision party and the Gentile mission of St. Paul. If you want to see that conflict, you need to read two short books in the New Testament. Read the Epistle of James and read Paul's letter to Galatians. Read the two together and you can see how they conflict with each other. Now, in Christian history, the basic effort was, let's smooth over the conflict. Let's make the conflict less severe. It's kind of like if you have a family gathering and there's some horrible conflict that develops, like two people get in a fight with each other and some big horrible conflict develops. What do you want to do going forward? Smooth it out and deny the conflict. That's kind of the human way. That's the way that the Christian version of the story got put together. But still, in looking at the New Testament, looking at it critically, I see a profoundly anti-Semitic document. I see a religious history that gave birth to all of the triumphs of imperial Rome that came to be galvanized in the magisterium of the Christian church in the time of Constantine, that fed forward into the Inquisition, that fed forward into European colonialism, that fed forward into the atrocities of anti-Semitism, that fed forward into the atrocities of Western racism. I see those historic sins emerging from the process that gave birth to the documents that we're reading. So I chose to write about that. I wrote a revisioning of the story of Jesus. And part of it is also because we are modern people, and modern people see the world differently than ancient people did. In the ancient world, everything was about the collective that you belong to. It was all, you didn't have the kind of individuality that we have now. This is my thing, this is your thing. In the ancient world, it was very much about belonging to a collective, being part of a collective. And so that that collective counter-collective dynamic is what occurred. The other thing to realize about ancient texts is people didn't read for pleasure. They didn't have, bookstores like this one. They weren't doing the kind of let's just read for the fun of it thing. Not at all. In the ancient world, the texts that we have were primarily used rhetorically. They are rhetorical instruments designed to fire up a group of people, to motivate and inform a group of people to take action on behalf of their collective. The dynamic was collective against collective. So, for example, if you take a look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you read, and I recommend the translation of Wise and Abegg. I do not recommend the translation of Vermes when you look at the translations that are available for the Dead Sea Scrolls. But there's two documents in the Dead Sea Scrolls worth reading: the War Scroll and the Damascus document. Both of them are incredibly informative. The War Scroll deals with the expectation of apocalyptic deliverance on the part of the Jewish Essenes, that God would send the armies of angels that would deliver the people from the oppression of the Romans. That's what the War Scroll is all about. And I know a lot of Christian critics are going to say, oh, well, no, it's not about Rome. It goes back to the period of the Maccabees. I believe that the Kittim are the Kittim, that the Romans are the Romans, and that this is all about what happened in the first century. There's a whole nother ball of trouble about pushing the Dead Sea Scrolls back before the New Testament, taking the Nag Hammadi material after the New Testament. Scholars do that, and you can Google and find plenty of published books that do that, and they do it in order to preserve the Christian narrative untouched, unchallenged, so that it would stand by itself. The fact is that this stuff all transpired in roughly the same time period, generally in the first century, that all this happened at the same time. Now, there is a conflict there. I chose to go through that conflict and write an alternative history. What are people going to object to? They're going to object to my denial of supernaturalism. The denial of supernaturalism is based on lived experience. It's just based on the world we live in today. It's based on the realization that the miracle stories as depicted in the biblical texts are largely aimed at motivating and encouraging collectives. Signs and miracles were a collective process that each group of people witnessed in order that they could strengthen their collective. And that's what I see happening in these documents. So I rewrote the history, and I don't doubt that folks are going to find all kinds of fault with it. I thank you for downloading it, and I look forward to your comments, and that you could let me know what your thoughts are when you read this essay. And I realize that it's trouble from the church perspective. There's no question about that. But please remember, I didn't write it for the church. I wrote it for everybody else. And I did not intend to offend anyone. But often, if you're going to offend someone, it happens when you didn't intend to offend them. Thank you for downloading the document. I look forward to your comments, and we'll be releasing another document next week.